Chapter 1, The Basics of Public Speaking. In this chapter, we will discuss what public speaking is, distinguishing public speaking from other modes of communication, discuss the elements of the communication process, origins of anxiety and how to deal with anxiety, and why public speaking is important. So think about it. When you think of a public speaker, what do you think about? Do you think of a U.S. president, a sales rep, your minister, priest, or rabbi, your professor, a dramatic courtroom scene, politicians, comedians? All of these things are different forms of public speaking. And so, what about you? Why are you in this course? It's often required for college degrees. Many people have very mixed emotions about taking this course. For many, it's a feeling of dread. I'm not naive. I know that most students don't enjoy this class. For others, you may already have some experience from high school or other activities. You may have been a competitive speaker or debater when you were in high school. You may have participated in things like FFA and had to do some speeches for activities with that. This might be a course you just want to get through. You know you have to do it. You've got to muddle through it, and that's your only approach. All of these are common. What I would challenge you to do is to think about your future plans, your future goals and career, and think about how effective communication skills can help to give you a leg up in that field and can make you more marketable as an employee as you compete for promotions within your work or even compete for various jobs. So, what is public speaking? Public speaking is an organized and intentional means to inform, entertain, or persuade a group of 5 or more people using words, physical gestures and delivery, and visual audio aids. So I want to focus on one word there: organized. Task. So when you think about developing your speeches, writing your speeches for this course, it's very important that the information that you share is very clear and it's very organized. And then it's done in a way, it's communicated in a way that your delivery enhances the quality organization and research and information you provided. It's an enlarged conversation with a purpose. You're either going to entertain, inform, or persuade. It's highly organized and dependent on the resources that you use. So think about the fact that when you develop a speech, when you're giving information to a large audience, think about that you need to bring in additional information that supports what you have to say. It needs to be something beyond your own personal experience. So it's an enlarged conversation that's highly organized and dependent on good, solid information and resources. According to most studies, people's number one fear is public speaking. Number 2 is death. So think about that. Death is the number 2 fear, with public speaking number 1. So that means that the average person would rather be the person in the casket at a funeral than actually doing the eulogy. I hope that none of you feel this drastic about your desire to do a speech in this class, but if you do, know that anxiety is normal. Most people that have an anxiety towards public speaking don't have a phobia, do not have the more extreme glossophobia. That's a severe fear of public speaking. Most people have anxiety, so that's much lower than true phobia. And anxiety comes from a couple of different things. Anxiety comes from all or nothing thinking. So many times when we approach something, we think it has to be perfect. If it's not perfect, it's a complete failure. And that's not the case. When we communicate, when we speak, we mess up. We stutter over our words. We mispronounce words occasionally. We throw in filler words like and to gather our thoughts. That's normal. It may lack perfection, but perfection is not what we're looking for. We're looking for someone that knows how to make a connection with their audience. So all or nothing thinking is a mindset that if your speech isn't perfect, then it's a complete failure. And that's an attitude we need to completely get out of our minds. That's very unrealistic that even the most polished professional speakers can't attain to that. So leave that out of your mind. Then we have overgeneralization. This is believing that a single event, such as failing at a task, is a universal or always event. So sometimes if someone has had a bad experience, in public speaking. They're only assuming that every other experience they have, they're going to make the same mistake and they can't move on from that. So it's overgeneralizing. I gave a speech once, it was a complete disaster. I will never be able to give a speech that's not a complete disaster. And that's not accurate. And then we have fortune telling. Fortune telling is the tendency to anticipate that things will turn out badly, no matter how much practice or rehearsal is done. So in this, we'll say to ourselves, oh, it doesn't matter if I practice. I know that I'm going to mess up. I know that I'm not going to do well with this. So there's no point in me practicing because I know that it will not go well. Then there's the fixed mindset. This is about our intelligence, our skills, and our learning ability. So when you think about the fixed mindset, you have to think about how are your thought processes going into this task? How are you approaching this task? How can you use all of your abilities to help make sure that this is an effective presentation? Your intelligence, the skill set that you have, your ability to learn and improve new things. And sometimes we have a fixed mindset that's stuck in that this won't get better. We're not open to growth. We're never going to be able to be better at this. We're never going to be successful at this. But you have to change that mindset to think, oh, look at all these other things that I started off at and I wasn't great at them. But I have the ability to learn and grow and polish and become more and more effective. And so that's what I need to focus on. And then we have fear of failure or rejection. So a lot of times when we're giving a speech, we are focused on the perception of the audience, how we feel like the audience thinks about us. What do we think the audience is thinking of us? Are they thinking bad of us? Do they understand it? Sometimes this is based on past experiences. Sometimes it's based on lack of preparation. But when we have that fear of failure, we're too focused on someone thinking bad of us that we don't focus on making sure we are doing the very best that we can do in communicating the message. We have fear of rejection. So sometimes that's rejecting us, and sometimes that's fear of individuals rejecting our attitudes or our beliefs or what it is that we're telling the audience about. So when we go into it, we're just worried about what other people are thinking of us, plain and simple. So you can help yourself by mentally preparing. Focus on the message itself and be realistic about your experience and what's at stake. So think about the words that you're saying. And are the words that I'm saying accurate? Are they well researched? Are they phrased and organized in a way that's clear for the audience to understand? And if you're doing those things, that's the majority of the battle. If someone adamantly disagrees with our words, we're not going to make them agree with us. But we can provide them enough information in a very well-structured way to make them think about what we're saying. And that's good enough. So think about your experience and what's at stake, and you focus on making sure you have a well-researched, well-organized, polished presentation. And that's all that you can focus on. You cannot control how someone accepts your message. You can also be physically prepared ahead of time. So when you're giving a speech, eat protein rather than food with high sugar content. So think about your energy level. Sometimes when we have things that are high sugar, the couple of things happen to us. Sometimes our brain just doesn't work the way it should. We get a little confused, we get a little foggy. Also, we know that we may have a high and then we kind of crash with that sugar. And you don't want that to happen when you're giving a speech. Sleep well the night before. Will wear comfortable but appropriate clothing. I've seen many students give speeches and it's clear that they're uncomfortable with what they're wearing. Maybe it's too tight, maybe it's too big, maybe it's not fully covering the way they normally would have it. And so sometimes that can be a challenge for students. So make sure that you look professional, you look polished, but it's also clothes that you're comfortable in. Utilize stretching techniques. So make sure you're loosened up and you're prepared to give the speech before it's time. Understanding the context will help. Know the location, the circumstance. Why am I giving this speech? know the audience, and arrive early and be prepared. Don't procrastinate. If you have anxiety towards public speaking occasions and you don't prepare effectively and you don't practice effectively and you don't feel familiar with the words you're saying, it's going to raise that anxiety even more. So practice, prepare ahead of time, and make sure that you're really ready to present the message. Remember, you never look as nervous as you feel, so don't worry about that. Your audience is rooting for you to do well. They're not rooting against you. And use powerful movements to help you gain confidence. And that's some things that we'll talk about more as we continue in this semester. So communication process. So right now we're going to talk about the communication as a process. And there are components to the communication process that we're going to discuss. So the first component we're going to talk about is people. So the people in the communication process, you have the senders. These are the people who begin the communication interaction. They start the communication. They initially send the message. Then you have the receivers. These are the people that the communication is directed to. But then in the process of communication, those roles exchange. So many times, if you're in a meeting, if you're in a communication context, you will send a message, but the goal is that that message is received and it's sent back, and then you begin a conversation or an interaction. So context is the situation in which communication occurs. So we must look at history. What happened between the senders and receivers before the speech? What sort of background do the individuals have? We consider cultural influences. What is the racial, ethnic, religious, or regional influences on the speaking situation? And is the speech taking place at a shrine or a monument? So what is the cultural impact of the communication context? And then think about the relationships. How do the sender and receiver know each other? And in what kind of hierarchy do they exist? Are you giving a presentation in front of people that you work with, that you work alongside? Are you giving a presentation in front of a group of people that are above you in the hierarchy of the organization where you work? And then think about, where is the speech taking place? So look at the situation in which communication occurs and all of the aspects surrounding that. Then you have the message. The message is the information being sent. Messages can be informal and spontaneous. That's what happens in conversations. Or they can be formal and intentional and planned, which is more of what happens when you're giving a speech. But the message is the information that is being conveyed. So consider, what is the content, what is the information, and what does the speaker want to say and have the receiver remember. The channel is how a message gets from the sender to the receiver. Just like a boat needs a channel to get through, so does a sender to get their message across. So there's a lot of different channels that we have. It can be face-to-face communication and immediate, as opposed to mediated through a computer or phone. So face-to-face communication has urgency, immediacy, and a linear nature of the communication. And then we have verbal or nonverbal communication. So throughout the communication process, we are communicating with our words, and we're communicating with our tone of voice and our gestures and all of these other aspects of communication that we may not think about as consciously as we do the words that we choose. Then there's feedback. Feedback is how a receiver responds to the sender. It's used to evaluate the effectiveness and decide on next steps in the interaction. It can be verbal. You can actually say something to the sender and have an intentional message sent back to the sender, or it can be nonverbal. It can be a nod or a head shake or a grimace to show that you may not like the message, but feedback can be verbal or nonverbal. This isn't in your book. This slide is not in your book, but 3 functions of feedback are assurance. We confirm that the message has been received and understood. We rephrase or restate a message to ensure the accurate understanding of the message. So perhaps someone sends a message to you, You think you get it, you're not totally sure, so you reply back to them in a way that you have understood the message to confirm understanding. And then insight provides additional information or perspective to the message received. So not only did you understand their message, but you have some thoughts on the matter that you're also going to share with them. Noise. So, noise is anything that interferes with the message, and it can be contextual. Something in the room or environment can interrupt the message. So, it can be a physical or external noise. There can be real noise like fire alarms, phones beeping, or even talking. Noise can even be if you have a fluorescent light in the room and it kind of is blinking on and off. It may not be something audibly heard, but it's a physical distraction that's keeping you from focusing in the learning situation. And then noise can also be psychological or internal. This includes stressors, anxieties, past experiences. I always give the example of if you're in a face-to-face class all day, you have various classes that you're going to, and you have your first class of the day, but you have a test in the second class of the day. So as you're trying to listen to the lecture and instruction from your teacher in your first class, your mind is probably on the test that you have the next class. Are you prepared with the material? You're running through the information in your head. Sometimes noise is hunger. Sometimes it's you're in your class, it's right before lunchtime. And so your brain is on what are you going to have for lunch next? So internal noise, I think, is our biggest distractor in communication. I think many times when we're in a communication interaction, whether it be a small conversation or a lecture in a classroom, we have the appearance of being in the moment. We have the appearance of paying attention, but there's psychological noise, there's stressors going on in our mind that are really distracting us from being in the moment and hearing and understanding the message. Then we have outcomes. Outcomes are the results. Did your audience learn something or find your argument of interest? In the message or the information that you sent, what were the results of that? And sometimes outcomes can be internal or external. Will your audience think about what you said, or maybe they'll go and do something? Maybe what you said is just thought provoking. It makes them think about it for a while, and that's a positive. Maybe what you said will make them change a behavior or go and take action on an issue. They can also be long or short term. Sometimes the audience will remember your message for a long time, way after it's ended, and sometimes it'll be something in their mind for a brief period of time. So putting it all together, it kind of looks like this. You have the sender, the person that sends or decodes a message, and decoding a message, encoding a message rather. Encoding is when we choose the words that we want to use to communicate the message. Decoding is the words when we receive a message, when we provide meaning to that message. We kind of take it apart and provide meaning to that message. But all through the sending and receiving of the message, you see the noise. You see that if there's interruptions, if there's internal or external noise, the ability for us to receive the message, to understand the message is interrupted. So I want you to think about, when you think about communication as a process, think about all of the things that can happen in the process as you're communicating with someone. And do you consider that when you have communication interactions? I think a lot of us send a message and shrug our shoulders like, yeah, I think I did a good job there. I think they got it. But we don't necessarily follow up. We don't necessarily ensure understanding. We don't necessarily make sure that there were no miscommunications in that process. So encoding, again, is the process of the sender putting his or her words or thoughts and feelings into symbols. Decoding is the process of the listener or the receiver understanding the words and symbols of a message and making meaning to them. So when you encode a message, you choose the words you want to use when you send that information. When you decode a message, you've received a message and you're applying your own meaning to that message. Symbol is any word, icon, picture, object that represents a concept, thing, or experience. Then there's denotative and connotative meaning. This is sometimes where we can have misunderstandings. Denotative is the objective or literal meaning shared by most people using the word. So when I say this word, typically we all have the same meaning of the word. Connotative is the subjective or personal meaning the word evokes in people together or individually. So sometimes you might say a word and it hits you the wrong way. Although the dictionary definition, it's an accurate way to communicate the message, the word itself hits you in a way that is bothersome to you. So sometimes that's the issue in the message. And I can give you an example. Years ago, it was two, 2002. I was in New York with a friend, and we were getting into a cab, and there was kind of a protest type thing going on outside of a building. And the cab driver said something to the effect of, there's always something like that going on. And he made the comment, we need a regime change in this country. So my friend and I looked at each other and we were like, I don't like that word. That's not the word I would have chosen when I would think of the United States government. I wouldn't have thought of the word regime. So although the dictionary definition, it was probably a very accurate way to communicate his feelings. The connotative meaning for my friend and I was that that's not the word we would have chosen to communicate what he was saying, but we understood where he was coming from. So sometimes we allow our connotative meaning to words to impact the message. There's three models of communication. There's linear transmissional, like bowling, where the speaker kind of sends out the message and then there's an immediate feedback. There's interactive, like ping pong, where communication goes back and forth. And then there's transactional, like charades, where there is a back and forth and a give and take. So what's the value of studying public speaking? It helps build desired communication skills for the workplace. It will give a solid foundation for other classes where presentations are expected. A background in public speaking will also help with the following personal skills: critical thinking and listening, confidence in overcoming fears, finding your voice that you feel comfortable communicating your thoughts and influencing your world, and making new friends. So remember these principles. Timing is everything. Make sure to comply with all time limits. Public speaking requires muscle memory. Just like perfecting a free throw or a kick, public speaking requires practice, and it's important that you prepare and practice before each public speaking opportunity. And it involves a content and relationship dimension. To build trust and respect and credibility is important when you're communicating a message to an audience. So it's very important that you remember the relational dimension in addition to the content dimension for a communication interaction. Emulate, don't imitate. Learn from those who do it well, but don't try to be them. If you're not being yourself, you're not going to do it well or naturally. Build on your strengths and address weaknesses. So a lot of students, some students have great speaking voices. They're very crisp, they're very clear, but maybe eye contact is a struggle. So focus on the things that you may have difficulty with. Remember the power of a story. Stories help create emotions, and it will bond you to your audience, and they will remember you. More things to consider. Investigate other models of communication. What are some public speakers that you admire and why? When this class is over, what skills do you want to develop as a communicator? So I always want my students to think about what career they want to go into, how will effective communication skills benefit them in that part of their life. Even beyond that, in your personal lives, like a few slides ago said, if it'll help give you your voice. Sometimes in relationships, we sit quietly, we don't say what we need out of the relationship, and we don't do our part to help the relationship grow because we haven't found our voice and we don't communicate our wants and needs. So think about how being an effective communicator can help you not only in your professional lives, but also your personal life. Think about how it can help you as a student in other classes, as it mentioned, or again, finding your voice. Sometimes you may need to talk to an instructor because you need help. You've got to understand things better. But a lot of students just don't want to. They're worried about that part. They're worried about communicating those things. So think about how you can communicate your voice, your needs, be an advocate for yourself because you become a more competent communicator. What behavior done by public speakers drive you nuts? What things do you not like that a public speaker does? What makes you turn off immediately? And when you experience communication anxiety, think about what happens in your own body. Do you get sweaty? Do you get shaky? Do you break out in hives? Know your physiological response to anxiety so that you kind of know how you can adjust to that when you're giving a speech. Let me know if you have any questions. That's all we have for Chapter 1.